This is not just a car. It is a metallic scream that sliced through an era and refused to be ignored. When the Countach first appeared, it split the history of supercars into before and after. It wasn't merely a machine, it was a provocation in aluminum, a rolling manifesto that redefined what a car could be. This is the untold story of how an outrageous sketch became a design philosophy, how stubborn craftsmen bent impossible shapes into reality, and how one defiant machine rewrote the visual language of speed. In the early 1970s, Lamborghini was riding the fame of the Miura, the car many called the most beautiful sports car in the world. But the world was changing. The late 1960s had been about curves, organic, sensual forms that mirrored the optimism of the age. The 1970s, however, were more angular, more cynical, more fascinated by the future. The soft, feminine beauty of the Miura suddenly seemed to belong to a past generation. A new audience wanted something that looked mechanical, unapologetically aggressive, a shape that didn't whisper beauty but shouted power. At Bertone, a young designer named Marcello Gandini was handed an impossible brief: create a Lamborghini that would not simply evolve from the Miura, but obliterate it. A clean break from everything before. Gandini was not interested in prettiness. He wanted tension, conflict, precision. His pencil cut across the page like a scalpel, carving out straight lines, knife-edged silhouettes, planes that collided instead of flowed. What emerged looked alien, even hostile, a shape with the geometry of a stealth fighter years before such things existed. When the Turin craftsmen first saw those drawings, they didn't speak in technical terms. They uttered a single exclamation in the Piedmontese dialect: Countach! A word of astonishment, disbelief, even awe. It stuck because no other word captured the reaction it provoked. The concept, first shown in 1971, struck like lightning. It looked less like a car and more like an idea made tangible. The stance was low and wide, like a crouched animal ready to pounce. The surfaces were taut and sharp enough to wound light itself. Where most cars of the previous decade flowed like liquid metal, this one fractured light into shards. Its nose was a blade, its sides sheer walls, its rear a blunt fortress of vents and ducts. Every surface served a purpose but also told a story of defiance against softness, against nostalgia. But what truly made it unforgettable were its gestures. The scissor doors that rose upward in a motion, part mechanical, part theatrical. The cockpit placed far forward between massive haunches. The sense that it had been designed by someone with a background in spacecraft rather than automobiles. It wasn't just transportation, it was sculpture that moved, a conversation between art and aggression. Turning that impossibly pure concept into a real, drivable car was another kind of drama. Behind the beauty lay endless argument, compromise, and ingenuity. The prototype's perfection met the brutal world of regulations, heat management, and production reality. The first road-going Countach had to grow wider, its cooling system reimagined, its chassis strengthened to survive real-world punishment. Yet even through the changes, Gandini's vision survived. The silhouette, the arrow-like wedge aiming toward infinity, remained intact, still radiating the same fearless simplicity. The famous scissor doors were born not only from showmanship but necessity. The car sat absurdly low to the ground, its sills thick and high from the wide tubular frame. Conventional doors would have been impossible to open in tight spaces. Gandini's solution was as elegant as it was dramatic. Pivot the doors vertically. What began as an ergonomic fix became a defining act of theater. Opening a Countach door wasn't just functional. It was ceremonial, a visual declaration that something extraordinary was about to happen. To this day, those doors are Lamborghini's most recognizable signature, a perfect blend of problem-solving and performance art. Underneath its origami body, Lamborghini remained loyal to its beating heart, the mid-mounted V12. It was a marvel of analog ferocity, its carburetors breathing through intake stacks that looked like organ pipes from a cathedral of speed. Mounted longitudinally behind the cockpit, the engine gave the car impossible balance and responsiveness, making it feel as if it pivoted around your spine. But the Countach was never just about numbers, horsepower, torque, or top speed. It was about feeling. The proportions told a story. The compact cabin thrust forward, the massive flanks bracing it, the short overhangs making the car look coiled and tense. It wasn't just fast, it looked fast even when standing still. The Countach lineage unfolded as a series of evolutions, each one more radical and self-assured than the last. The earliest LP400s were almost pure design statements, clean, uncluttered, and shockingly minimalist. They were closer to concept cars than production vehicles, all sharp edges and tension. As years passed, the LP400s arrived, widening the stance, adding bold flares and spoilers that turned the visual language from sleek elegance to muscular aggression. Later variants, like the LP500s and 5000 QV, brought more displacement, more cooling, more presence, and inevitably more compromise. As the Countach grew more powerful, it also grew more complex, its purity diluted by the demands of emissions laws, safety regulations, and the practical needs of a broader clientele. Yet even then, it remained unmistakable. A machine that looked drawn by lightning. Production at Sant'Agata Bolognese was less like industrial manufacturing and more like ritual craftsmanship. There was no assembly line in the traditional sense. Panels were hammered by hand over wooden bucks, edges aligned by sight and feel, leather stitched by artisans who had memorized every contour of the cockpit. Each Countach that left the factory bore subtle irregularities, invisible signatures of the people who built it. The process was excruciatingly slow and personal. These were not cars, they were mechanical artworks, and ownership demanded reverence. They overheated, they idled poorly, their clutches were heavy, but none of it mattered. To drive a Countach was to participate in something sacred, to perform devotion in metal and motion. Culturally, the Countach landed like an explosion. The 1970s and 1980s were decades intoxicated by excess, style, and self-expression. The car's image spread faster than any marketing campaign could hope to engineer. Teenagers who would never touch one covered their walls with its posters. Its name became a code word for ambition, wealth, and danger. Directors used it in films to symbolize untouchable status. Photographers framed it like a fashion model draped in velocity. The Countach became not just a Lamborghini, but the Lamborghini, the visual shorthand for the idea of a supercar itself. But behind the glamour was a constant tension between aesthetic purity and practical usability. The Countach was thrilling but also unforgiving. Its cockpit visibility bordered on non-existent. Reversing required drivers to open the door and lean out, half sitting on the sill to see behind. Cabin temperatures climbed dangerously high in traffic. The seating position demanded flexibility and nerve. It was uncomfortable, irrational, and deeply alive. Every flaw was a reminder that this car prioritized sensation over convenience. Critics called it impractical. Fans called it pure. Both were right. As the 1980s advanced, regulation and modernization forced Lamborghini to evolve. America, the largest and most lucrative market, demanded safety bumpers, emission controls, and greater reliability. Engineers responded with thicker structures, larger engines, and cosmetic adjustments that kept the design compliant but altered its character. The 25th Anniversary Edition, launched in 1988, embodied this paradox. More refined, more comfortable, but arguably less wild. Purists lamented the loss of the original's raw simplicity. Yet for many, this later version was the Countach that burned itself into popular memory. The one on calendars, in music videos, and in every child's imagination. Behind all this thunder, Lamborghini itself was fighting to survive. The Countach was built through financial storms, ownership changes, and near bankruptcy. Each new iteration wasn't just a design decision, it was a lifeline. Every sale helped keep the dream alive in a company that often had more passion than profit. It is one of the car's quiet triumphs that it existed at all. An improbable, beautiful rebellion against corporate caution. In that sense, the Countach wasn't just a product of Lamborghini's golden age. It was the reason that golden age endured. Its technical influence is often overshadowed by its visual shock, but it's no less important. The Countach cemented the mid-engine V12 layout as Lamborghini's spiritual core. It taught the industry that bold geometry could coexist with mechanical honesty. The car's visible vents, exposed mechanics, and functional aggression made honest design desirable decades before the term became fashionable. Its doors, its stance, its defiant proportions. Each became a visual code that would define not only Lamborghini but the very idea of a supercar for generations. Over time, the Countach's legend matured. What was once seen as excessive became recognized as visionary. Early LP 400s, once overlooked, are now museum-grade treasures. Later models, once criticized, are cherished for their raw charisma. Collectors revere them not just as investments but as time machines, metal artifacts of an era when designers still drew by hand and believed that form could shock the world awake. The myths surrounding the Countach, the celebrity owners, the impossible speeds, the posters that defined youth culture, have grown as much a part of its identity as its specifications. And like all great myths, they carry a truth deeper than fact. The Countach made people dream. It gave shape to ambition, to rebellion, to the idea that technology and art could merge into something emotional and extreme. It was a mirror of human desire, reflecting both vanity and wonder. In the end, the Countach is not simply a chapter in automotive history, it is a manifesto written in steel. It stands for the belief that creativity should provoke, not appease, that beauty can be sharp-edged and unsettling, that imperfection can be magnificent if it comes from conviction. Gandini and the team at Lamborghini didn't just design a car, they built an argument about what design itself could mean. The Countach was never perfect, and that's why it's eternal. Perfection is forgettable, audacity is not. It continues to haunt every designer who sketches a line too safe, every engineer who calculates without dreaming. It whispers, in its own metallic roar, that progress belongs to the bold. If you imagine a symphony of metal, heat, and speed, a vehicle that reads like a scream in chrome, that is the Countach. It reminds us that design can be heroic, that engineering can flirt with spectacle, and that sometimes the most provocative objects are the ones we remember longest. Because long after the engines fall silent and the factories move on, the Countach remains, a wedge of defiance cutting forever into the memory of anyone who dares to look.